Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today I want to talk about what we have learned recently about the fallout of forced, top-down, heavy-handed return to office mandates. There are multiple reports that highlight the negative consequences of pretty rigid top-down return to office mandates. The Greenhouse Candidate Experience Report, that's from a staffing firm, the Federal Reserve Survey of Household Economics and Decision Making, Federal Reserve, and Unispace's Reporting for Good Report, space-oriented company. So looking at Unispace, as you can guess, is about office space. So let's talk about those reports in turn. According to the Unispace report on companies that actually enforce office returns, top-down, heavy-handed ones, nearly half, 42%, faced higher attrition than expected, and almost a third, 29%, struggle with recruiting candidates. So companies, in other words, knew it would cause some attrition, would cause recruitment challenges, but they weren't ready for how bad it was. So again, nearly half, 42%, had higher attrition than they expected. They expected some attrition, but they had higher attrition than expected. According to the Greenhouse report, 76% of employees may leave companies if the companies don't offer some flexibility. And from employees from underrepresented groups are 22% more likely to leave. The SHED survey, that's the Federal Reserve, shows that shifting to traditional work arrangements generates the satisfaction similar to a 2 to 3% pay cut, which of course creates a lot of dissatisfaction among people. So let's talk about the triggers for employee attrition. There are several factors that cause people to consider leaving a company. One is increased compensation, another is greater job security and career advancement. So those are career-oriented factors. The next is flexible work, followed by positive company culture. So the desire for flexible work policies is second only to career-centric factors like pay, security, and promotion opportunities. So flexible work is incredibly important to people. What about employee feelings about choices in terms of coming to the office? So the Unispace report looked at staff feelings about returning to the office. Choice-based return was one approach, so where employees had a choice in how and whether to return to the office. They had some kind of option, they had a voice. 31% reported being happy, 30% motivated, and 27% excited. But if they didn't have a choice, if it was a mandate, top-down mandate, there was significantly less happiness at 27%, motivation 26%, and excitement at 22%. So clearly employees prefer a choice-based return over this top-down mandated return. And that's something to really think about, that mandated returns are going to make employees less happy, motivated, and excited than if they have a choice, if they have a say in how they return to the office. So let's talk about a case study. So there was an insurance firm with about 2,000 employees that I worked with that saw significant attrition after a mandatory office return, which the Greenhouse report, that's similar to what the report found. And I helped them shift to a team-driven office return, where individual teams made the decision. So I was working with them as a consultant. I helped them shift to a team-based office return, which allowed for flexibility, collaboration, and mentoring. And the results were that attrition was significantly reduced and their in-office sentiment improved. They were more happy, motivated, and excited. Another one. So there was a financial services firm that had high staff attrition despite being pretty competitive in their job offers and their promotion, their salary, and so on. And so they conducted an internal survey which showed that employees really wanted better flexible work policies, which is similar to what the Greenhouse and SHED reports suggest. And so they consulted with me and made policy adjustments to enhance flexibility, and that helped them improve their turnover rate, so they had lower attrition after that. Another case study is a late-stage software as a service startup. They worked with me to introduce flexible work policies. And this had a clear immediate impact. This was employee turnover decreased, job applications increased, and that aligns with findings from all 3 reports. And that, by the way, happened actually before the pandemic, this SaaS startup. So they did it before the pandemic, and they had all of these benefits, and they continued it during the pandemic. Now, there are some cognitive biases that you need to be aware of that cause us to make bad decisions around office returns. Cognitive biases are decision-making errors that shape our decisions and perceptions. They stem from our intuitions, our feelings. One of them is the status quo bias. So the status quo bias is the tendency to stick to what we know and what we're comfortable with. So tech startup, for example, it had a really good experience with a pretty hybrid, flexible model during the pandemic. But after vaccines became widely available, the leadership reverted to in-office work. So in-office work, they said, let's all come back to the office. And that resulted in high turnover and resistance, a lot of problems. And that's the status quo bias in action. The leadership perceived the right way to be as the status quo prior to the pandemic. And they tried to get back to it, and that caused them a lot of problems because staff became used to flexibility and they resisted losing it. Another one is the anchoring bias. So anchoring bias is where we get anchored to certain information. It's not quite the same thing as a status quo bias. It's about the first information that's available to us. So financial institution, again, after widespread availability, enforced a full return to office. That caused many employees to be upset. And that is where employees, in that case, were initially attracted by the anchors of brand and pay scale, but the pandemic caused them to shift what they focused on to work-life balance and flexibility. And so the rigid RTO policy harmed their perception of what the organization was about. That resulted in a lot of dissatisfaction and, of course, resulted in high turnover. So that leads us to the crucial role of flexibility in the future of work. We have those 3 reports from Greenhouse, the Federal Reserve, and Union Space, which show that firms must adopt flexible work or face real uncertainty around their people, around retention, recruitment, employee morale, engagement, happiness. In the future of work, flexibility is unquestionably essential. It's not a trend, it's the real new standard. It's the key for talent attraction and talent retention. Flexibility is the key for that. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps other people discover the show and it helps us improve the show.